And then the third key, Vince, is you got two big young guys. One of them has to force himself onto the field. And I'm talking Aiden Anna and Gabriel Rubio. You don't need both of them per se, but it's even better if both of them do. But you need at least one of them to step up and say, hey, Gabriel Rubio was 290 as a freshman. Aiden's over 300 pounds.
Yeah, he's 310.
You talk about the lack of beef. Those two guys don't lack beef, especially Aiden.
Right.
That's my fifth one from Coach Washington. Find a big guy.
Yeah.
Right? Develop a big guy. You've got two of them. Get them ready. And if both of them can get ready, now that's where this D-line becomes elite. Is you've got this long,
it's all about depth,
right, bam. And so that's kind of where that's where it needs to be, in my opinion.
Because we've talked about depth a million times and how key that is to having an elite defensive line. And with two guys that have been a mainstay in your starting lineup moving on, to graduation and all that, now you have to develop more depth. Right. I mean, and that depth, it's cyclical, right? The depth that you had needs to move up and be more productive from a starting role or from an enhanced role. And then your guys that were not really contributing need to be depth guys.
Mm-hmm.
You need to continue that cycle. And those young guys that you just mentioned, look, man, I'm unabashedly a huge Gabriel Rubio fan. I mean, I love what he brings to the table. I would have loved to see him a little bit more this past year. But I know he was dealing with an injury too, wasn't he?
Yes.
Off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yes.
So, it's totally understandable. So you want to get him back healthy 100%, obviously. But, man, I think he adds even more depth. Like, he's more than just a depth player. He has the ability to be more than just a depth player.
Yeah.
And he has the size coming in. And like you said, he was, 290?
Yeah.
Adding 10 pounds of good weight on his frame, which is already a good frame. I mean, he's listed at 6'5" and a quarter, 290. You can add 10 pounds to that and make it good weight, right?
Right.
And now you're long and athletic inside too. And there's a little bit of your beef. So, and then obviously Aiden Anna was 310, and he'll be just fine as well. So you're right. If those guys can step up and if they can add more to the depth and become more than just depth guys, that's when this defensive line takes a step in a really elite direction.
Right. And the funny thing is, we're talking about Aiden Anna and Gabriel Rubio needing to force their way onto the field because there's not an open path. There's not just like these guys are gone. Here it is, because there still is Jason Adamiola, and there, you could keep Riley Mills inside. You still have Jacob Lacey. You still have Howard Cross. I mean, there's still guys there. To me, Jason Onye is a guy that could maybe slide inside. He was 285 as a true freshman at defensive end. Sure. He's going to outgrow that position in like he probably already has.
Right.
We just don't know it officially yet.
Right. 6'5", 289 as a freshman.
5 years ago, right, when this whole turnover started in 2017, those guys were playing as freshmen, would have played as freshmen because of where the depth was. So it's come a long way, but now you've got really good players in your depth. But do you have difference makers in your depth? That's a bigger question. That's what we don't know yet.
Right.
Can Gabriel Rubio play? He was a top 100 recruit. Can he play to that level? That remains to be seen. He's going to be healthier now. They need him to step up and kind of say, hey, this kid's too good not to play. They need Aiden Anna to say, Coach, if you don't find a way to get me 10, 15 snaps a game, man, then you're not doing this coaching thing right. Like, not saying that, but saying that with his play.
Yeah.
Right? Because that makes them a better team. Number one, I think they would love to have a 3-deep rotation in most games. And what I mean by that is your rotation can look different against Marshall and Cal than it will against Ohio State, Clemson. Meaning you can have a 10 to 12-man rotation in those other games because those kids can play. They can help you. It's a chance to get them 8 to 10 to 12 snaps a game. But you may not be comfortable playing them against Ohio State. You may not be comfortable playing them against Clemson, right? So they've got to force their way into that first rotation.
Sure.
Then if they can make plays in those games, then it sets them up to say, hey, now you need to play me against BYU. Now you need to play me because that's going to be grown man football. I mean, literally, BYU plays a bunch of mid to late 20 year old guys.
Yeah.
They may not have the athleticism of other teams, but they're going to be a physical football team because they're literally grown men in a lot of instances. Then you play me against Clemson, play me against USC, play me against Stanford. They've got to earn those reps in practice. Then they got to earn those reps when they get on the field against the Marshalls and the Cowls and the teams like that. And so to me, that's that next step for them. That's that next step for Notre Dame to get to and say, hey, when you can do this, now you got something going. If they can get to the point where those guys have to play, that's where Notre Dame really finally takes that big time step because like if Jacob Lacey does what I think he can and Gabriel Rubio, Aiden Count to do that, then Jacob is even better than that because you can still keep his reps down.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, because you've got Gabriel and Aiden playing there. And I think that helps you with Howard Cross because if Gabriel and Aiden both step up, I think Gabriel's more natural. I don't think he wants to hear this, but his more natural position is nose tackle in this defense because he is a big, strong, physical kid that can also be disruptive. Aiden obviously is a nose tackle. If both of those guys force their way into the rotation, now Howard Cross bumps out to 3 technique. That makes him better because he's not a natural nose. He's able to get it done, but that's not his natural position. He was a defensive end in high school. He's 275 pounds. He's 6'1.5".
Right.
If you can start playing him a 3 technique because you're comfortable with what you have at nose and Lacey, Aiden, and Gabriel Rubio, you know what I mean? So but the whole thing about all of this, Vince, is, and we'll talk about the freshman here in a second. The whole thing about all of this is these are a lot of ifs. If Jacob Lacey is this, if Aiden is this, if Riley Mills breaks out, if Alexander Ehrensberger breaks out, if Gabriel Rubio breaks out, if Aiden breaks out, those are a lot of ifs.
Sure.
And I always get a little, I can't just, this is going to be a great D line. I know it because why? Because all the ifs are going to work out, right? That's like a fan. That's fan talk, right? Like if I want to do like a fan show where it's like everything is awesome, that's when you do that, right? And yes, I have seen the Lego movie. So to me, the more of those ifs that turn into the better this team is going to be, and that's where you kind of get into. Here's a question for you. What's the Harry Hiestand effect on the defensive line?
Interesting. That's interesting. So you're talking about when the offense is going up against the defense and forcing
even the backup offensive line, even the scout team offensive line.
Because it's funny because in fall practice when we were watching, it was, man, this defensive line is really, really good. Wait a second. Maybe the offensive line isn't as good as we think it is, right? Well, if the defensive line is dominating moving forward next fall, let's say, because I'm not saying I give a pass to the spring, but if they're dominating in the fall, then they're dominating in the fall. You know what I mean? Because this offensive line is going to be coached in a completely different way. And there was a comment in there, and I think I starred it, but I'm not 100% sure about the fact that they need to think about moving some offensive linemen over to defensive line, and how Billy Schrouth and Rocco Spindler need to be on the defensive line because they're so aggressive.
No, Billy Schrouth does not need to be on the defensive line.
And how Rocco didn't play because Jeff Quinn was trying to knock the aggressiveness out of him before he was going to play offense. That's exactly what I don't want. Those guys will thrive. Let's say that all of that is true. Okay, that those guys are so aggressive, blah blah blah. They'll thrive in a Harry Hiestand offensive line. And there's plenty of guys. There's not a bunch of holes over there on the defensive line where you need to start moving offensive linemen over there. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would address that particular comment. That's not what they need to be doing. And they will do so well in Harry Hiestand's offensive line,
right,
if they're going to be aggressive like that. So,
and then, to me, I don't think those guys, I think a lot of times when you don't see, I don't understand why we're talking about moving an offensive lineman over there, because there's guys there that haven't played that you need to use, right? There are guys on your roster, Aiden Count, Gabriel Rubio. I'm sorry, Rocco Spindler's not a better D-line prospect than Gabriel Rubio. Now, if there's some injuries, maybe you have that conversation. But right now, I'm trying to get those guys ready to play offensive line.
Right.
They need to develop the guys they have. Develop Jason Onye, develop Gabriel Rubio, develop Aiden Canaana. I don't want to take reps away from those guys to give them to offensive linemen because you think they may be able to help you.
Right.
Get those guys ready. And here's the other thing. Aiden Canaana weighs more than both of those guys. He's bigger than both of those guys. So that's who I'm coaching up. I'm not getting those guys ready.
Yeah.
Where I'm talking about the Harry Hiestand effect is just having to go against a physical, tough, fundamentally sound Harry Hiestand coached offensive line. Mike Elko talked about it in 2017. We've seen coaches talk about it in the past. Like going against that line every day made us so much better. Because by the time you got to Saturday, I was like, these guys are nothing. Do you know what we've been having to go against every day this week in practice? So I think that's something that I'm curious to hear about too. Is how does that impact? How does that impact play the defensive line? Because you are going to be going up against a much better coached unit. Because like we talked about, like the D line just destroyed the offensive line. And you're like, are they that good or is the offensive line that bad? And then you kind of realize it's a little bit of both, but like it was too easy at times in the spring. I mean, sometimes the line, like we're watching the first team offensive line in practice sometimes, Vince, and you're seeing it live, you're showing me clips, and then I'm seeing it on the highlights. And it's like, was that supposed to be like a screen? Because like everybody came through. You're like, no, that was inside zone. You're like, yeah, that ain't good. That ain't good.
No, it's not.
That's bad. And it just was like constantly. And, I talked to sources like, man, like the D line is just killing the offensive line.
And if this was 5 years ago, then I'd be like, wow, defensive line's playing really, really well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was a bit of a hangover to that for a while. But then last year it was just like, oh man, this could be bad.
Right.
and it was honestly, it ended up being that. I mean, it was shades of what was to come. So it's not good. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, Brian. And I'm hoping that comes to fruition even in the spring, but as well as the fall and moving forward. So.
And then the final piece for me is the freshmen. What impact do the freshmen have? Because the nice thing about the freshmen this year is that they are on campus. They're early enrollees. I think that's a big thing. I think it's nice to have, those guys on campus that are, early enrollees, because they get that whole, the biggest thing for me is, the coaching is nice and all that kind of stuff. It's nice to get good coaching, but the bigger thing for me, Vince, and you know where I'm going with this, the bigger thing for me is I want to see them be in the weight room for 5 months. Like when I think of Tyson Ford and Aiden Gabera getting a 5 to 6 month head start in the Matt Bayless strength program, I start getting kind of like, this is going to be fun to watch, because like, especially Ford, because like Tyson's he's got that big baby body, right? Like he's got that body where he's just broad shoulders and big, but he's kind of got like
there's nothing on it.
He's a giant human being, and like he's a giant little kid. What you know what I mean? Like he's got the
baby face.
There's not a lot of definition.
Yeah.
You get him, but some guys are just like that.
Right.
Once they kind of stop growing and then get into a college weight room, college nutrition program, because I don't think people understand how expensive it is for parents to feed their children the way that a college football team feeds their children. It is expensive.
Yeah.
And you think you're feeding them that way until they get there and you realize like, wow, they're doing something completely different. And so to me, I'm excited to see what they do because they're going to struggle in the spring most likely. I mean, that's kind of what freshmen do in the spring.
To be expected,
right? But you see those flashes, right? You get that time in the weight room. So then by the time they get to July, when the rest of the freshmen show up, they're 7 months in. Like that kind of like, okay. And because I'm looking at all these guys like Nana and Aaronsberger and Mills and I'm like, y'all better be ready to bring it, because don't give Tyson Ford that open window. Don't give Aiden Gabira that open window. Don't give them that, okay, you didn't want to practice today or whatever the case may be. Look, you want to give that. And if I'm Notre Dame, I'm not playing Jason Ademiyola a ton during the spring.
Right.
I'm not playing Isaiah Foskey a ton during the spring. I'm going to spend a mess of time with them in individual But when we get to team, I want to see what Aiden can do. I want to see what Will Schweitzer can do.
Sure.
I want to see what Ahrensberger and Rubio, I want to see what those guys can do. I don't need to see what Foskey can do in team. I'm going to work with him in individual, one-on-one pass rushes where we can really work on his repertoire. That's the only time I care about with Foskey. When I get into team stuff, I maybe give him some snaps just to keep him fresh, but I want to see what how much Will Schweitzer has developed.
Right.
I want to see I want to get Aiden Gobira reps. I want to get Tyson Ford reps. Those are the things for me, if I'm out of Washington, I'm going to want to do this spring, is really see what those young guys can do.
Absolutely.
And, if they can step up and play. So the point is, there's just so much talent on this defensive line, and it's deep talent. But it's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of ifs. And when you have those ifs, it's hard to get too fired up about them being elite until those questions start finding answers. And that's what the spring is going to really be about, Vince, is which one of these long list of ifs turn into yeses,
right,
or have arrives, and those type of things. And that's what I'm looking forward to finding. So.